Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Business Brew. I'm your host, Bill Brewster. This episode is brought to you by Koifin. Koifin displays financial information simply and elegantly. It's one of the fastest growing platforms for financial data and analytics to research stocks and understand market trends. I discovered Koifin thanks to their very passionate user base, many of which are my friends. Imagine a Bloomberg Light with tons of high-quality fundamental data, a powerful graph engine that can show it all clearly, and a user interface that doesn't look like it was built in the 1990s. If you're an individual investor, research analyst, portfolio manager, or financial advisor, do yourself a favor and check them out. You won't regret it. Sign up for free at koifin.com. That's KOYFIN.com. This episode is timely. I moved it up. The guest, Rui Ma, is a China tech expert. She is the host of a popular podcast called Tech Buzz China, and I recommend that you all check it out. I have been asked many questions about China, and I have no opinions really worth sharing. Many unformed thoughts, probably none better than any of y'all's. So I invited Ray to come on the podcast to try to fill in some of the blanks. And I hope that this conversation is a good one for y'all to listen to, is informative, helps color some of the articles that maybe you've been reading lately, and I think that you're going to see a very uplifting energy in Ray. She's a heck of a person, and I'm lucky to have got to meet her, and I'm thankful that she came on the pod. As always, none of this is financial advice. All of the information contained in this program is for entertainment purposes only. Please consult your financial advisor before making investment decisions and do your own due diligence. So with that out of the way, Ray, how you doing today?
I'm doing great.
I'm very excited to speak with you. We met not that long ago in LA at a very nice day. I've been ruminating on that day about win-wins. That's been my big takeaway.
Yes, me too. And about giving back to the community as we are doing now.
That's right. Well, I appreciate you coming on my show to give back to my community. Some people, I'm on another podcast called Value After Hours, and they write in and they ask me questions about China. And no matter how often I tell them, I have no idea what I'm speaking about, please stop asking this question, they continue to ask the question. So I am hopeful that you can give some intelligence to my listeners that I am unable to deliver, and I know you'll be able to.
Thank you. I hope so as well. I saw some of the questions, and they are very interesting indeed.
Yeah, well, we'll stay away from some of the stock stuff, but I'm interested in kind of your take on a lot of things. We'll get into that. But do you want to give people a little bit of a background on who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Ray. I am right now based in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley, and it is also where I grew up. So I was born in China, but I immigrated to the States with my parents when I was 8. And
Did you speak English at the time?
No. I mean, I took elementary English lessons, as one does, but I could barely speak anything, and I really didn't understand a word when I arrived.
Wow, that's got to be wild. My wife didn't speak English until she was 6. She spoke Polish. And talking to her, she always felt like she was behind in school, but she was always working really hard, but she didn't understand what was going on around her until she was 8 or 9. And you were even further behind in that way.
8, and I was already in 4th grade, and because we started off in South Carolina, where there were not a lot of immigrants, so there was only one ESL class, English as second language, and even though I was a 4th grader, there was just one class, right? So I was stuck with the 1st graders, and we were just dancing Simon Says. So,
that must have been tough. I'm serious, right? Because you're a 4th grader, but you're in the 1st grade class, and no offense to South Carolina, but I'm not sure it's the most accepting culture of that kind of, that's wild. I didn't know that, obviously.
Back in 1989, yes. It was very, I think there were definitely less than 10 Asians in the whole school. It might have been just me and my, 2 friends, actually.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Huh. At what point did you find yourself feeling truly assimilated?
I think that's something I personally don't necessarily try to go for assimilation
Okay.
in any culture, but I think, I feel very comfortable here in the US.
I guess I
Probably
should
it
have said comfortable
started
as a child and like where you
comfortable as a
went.
child.
I didn't mean like a
Yeah. Yeah, like the Borg, you mean. Like I think where I really probably started feeling very comfortable was probably eighth grade when we were reading Shakespeare, and then it started to hit me that no one else understood it either, And I was like, oh yes, we're all on the same page when it comes to English fluency, proficiency with Shakespearean English. Yes.
I like that. That's funny.
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay. Well, we diverted a little bit. So you came to America.
Right. And then, I went to school here. I'm probably older than you. I just turned 40 this year. So
I'm 39.
In college during the Okay, close.
Yeah.
We're the upper bound of millennials, and I went to school during the dot-com boom and bust here at Berkeley. So pretty much stayed in California and moved to China in 2007 after working for 3 years in investment banking, really for personal reasons. No particular. I didn't actually want to go to China. My top city choices were New York or London. I was really obsessed with London. I don't know why.
London's cool.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
it was all the Shakespeare, the affinity I felt for Shakespeare. And I just ended up in Shanghai and then stayed there for 8 years, actually working mostly in investment roles in real estate, media, and technology. Then moved back at the very end of 2015, continued to go to China the next year. So really, really, washed my hands of China tech at the very end of 2016. I was intending to do something else entirely, but got sucked back in to do this podcast called Tech Buzz China, really again for fun, as a favor to a friend, because we were talking about how to grow his audience. He was building a website, a media called Pandaily for China tech for overseas readers, and got sucked back in, thought like all the companies and stories I was talking about was really interesting and way more interesting than what was taking place when I was working in China, even though only 2 years had passed. And then just gradually got sucked in more and more. So now I'm working on it full time. So I have a community for investors and operators, but I think it's really probably mostly investors we have in the community. Focus on China tech. Yeah.
That's cool. I remember the first time that I heard your podcast, I think it came out, somebody on Twitter, would it make sense if it was like early 2019?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah,
well, we
you
started in
recording
we started in April 2018, I think.
Yeah. And then I was like, oh, this is awesome. This is somebody talking about Chinese tech in like a nuanced way, and I can actually understand it. And then it was off to the races.
Yeah, although I haven't updated the podcast for a while.
Well, that's okay. I did notice that when I was trying to figure out like what's currently interesting to you, and I saw you did something with the people at Acquired, and then there's some other ones out there. But your feed did see it was hard to find the last one. Well,
yeah, it was back in May. We do have some episodes coming up, but it just takes a lot out of me to research and script, and ours is all scripted, completely opposite of this conversation. Yeah, right. And we basically, it just takes me a long time, and I've been really, really busy with our community. So I write very regularly for the community. So sorry.
Where can people go if they want to join the community?
techbuzzchina.com/insider. So we have and actually everything we do is on the website. So all the past, podcast transcripts, etc. as well. I'm actually someone who doesn't listen to a ton of podcasts. I like to read more. So I'm really obsessed with having like accurate transcripts for everything we do because, I like to use search and jump around.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that it takes a lot out of you. I find like I had to take a break, and I don't know, there's something about it is very draining to record something and then to have the pressure of having them come out a lot. It's, I don't know. I like doing it quite a bit. There's obviously something that I enjoy about it to do it, but it's not, it is draining. It takes a lot of bandwidth.
It is. Right. It is. Yeah.
And then you took a bunch of investors to China in 2019, right? Friend of the pod, Sean Stannard Stockton was on that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sean is great. He reached out to us and was basically like, we don't intend to invest in China. We don't have any investments in China, but we think China is really important to understanding how, the world's going to evolve and directly impacts stuff in our portfolio. So our friends went there, had this great trip. We're really envious. Can you take us there? And initially I was like, no, I'm not a tour guide. But Sean introduced us to members of MOI Global, Manual of Ideas, and we were able to get together a group of, I think it was 15 investors, 15 really great investors. It was an amazing trip. We actually still talk in this one WhatsApp group that we created.
That's
for
cool.
That trip every day. Yeah.
Shout out to MOI. Do you know John?
Yeah. I do not know John, but I want to say I'm really inspired by the community he's built.
Yeah.
In some ways, what I'm doing at TechBest China Insider is a very, very small version, tiny version of what he's done. And I actually tell people, even though I'm not personally part of the community, I tell people about my respect for the community and what I observed firsthand, the camaraderie, the mutual respect, the very open sharing, and how much people identify with each other because of their affiliation with this community.
Yeah. Manual of Ideas is, you know what it is? There's no assholes. Like, it is a bunch of people that I look up to them as individuals, and I think that they are a very thoughtful group of investors and people. And I agree with you. He's cultivated a very solid following. There's not a ton of members. I'm fortunate to be in it. It is a bit inspiring, I'll say. There you go, John. Yeah. You inspire me. If you're listening, which I think you may be. All right. So to sort of like frame a little bit, when we were talking in LA, there was the crackdown on education tech, right? Is it ed tech is correct, is what the crackdown was on?
It was technically on after school tutoring, but a lot of those companies had raised, venture capital funding, and some of them were publicly listed. So yeah.
So I thought what was interesting because I'm an idiot when it comes to this stuff. So I'm just going to ask you like super first grade questions, and hopefully you cannot think that I'm too dumb.
No.
But so one of the interesting conversations, can you frame a little bit about what those education companies and what the culture of after school education was like in China before the crackdown?
Before the crackdown, so to give you some context, basically China is culturally, as a society, very much values education, and the entire K-12 system is really to gear you to be prepared for the college entrance exam, which is like sort of the one great level playing field, right? No matter who you are taking this one exam. Well, I guess it's actually not a uniform exam. It differs from province to province, but they're largely, the same level of difficulty, et cetera. And based on your score, it really determines where you go to college. And in China, it's really important where you go to college because your alumni networks are, I would say, much closer than even here in the States. And it really determines where you get work, right? Because much like in finance, how you have targeted schools, in China, it's even more, I think. A lot of the job ads are geared towards specific grads of, certain universities, et cetera. So it really determines the trajectory on which, the rest of your life depends. And what was happening was that this is an extremely competitive exam, right? And it's only one shot, right? It's a couple of days and you just do it once. And it doesn't matter what your extracurriculars and, your grade point average or whatever it is. It's just, everything is based on this one exam. So people prepare like crazy for it. In order to prepare like crazy for it, they try to get into the best public or it's not necessarily public, but they get to the best high school. And then in order to get to the best high school, they actually have to test into the best middle school. So it's this whole system where it's like you are taking tests in order to qualify for the best instruction that ultimately prepares you for this one college entrance exam throughout your whole life. So it's very, very, very stressful. And in order to get a leg up, you do a ton of after school tutoring. And what was being distorted in the market was, number one, not only was the after school tutoring super intense. So kids are studying till maybe midnight every day, 11 p.m., very normal, right? Every day, it's 6 days a week. I did a scholarship in China, and the regular schedule, if you're in high school, was 6.5 days of study, and you only get sort of one full day off a month. And every day you're starting from 7 a.m. and ending at 11 p.m. Just pure studying, like nothing else. And for the after school tutoring that was taking place, not only did people perceive this to be necessary, right, for their kids' advancement, but they were spending a ton of money on it. And when they were spending a ton of money on it, it started to distort the market because as teachers realized, like, oh, hey, I can get more money tutoring kids, right? So then some of them left to go become tutors, or others did even worse, which is they just didn't teach the things they're supposed to teach in class. And they would say, hey, you should come to my tutoring class after, tutoring sessions after school where I can help you understand what's going on in class.
That's messed
but
up.
in reality, they weren't actually teaching. And of course, for you to get a good, test score and for you to excel in class, you have to attend these. So even though they were voluntary on paper, technically what was happening was it started becoming some kind of compulsory situation, right? And if you look at China has and I'm just giving you the background on why this was
I really appreciate
bad,
this.
right?
This is helpful.
Yeah. So it's really expensive. People felt like they had to do it, or else like they could not. Their kids were not going to succeed in life, and it became a huge expense. So, to give you an example, they did a survey of Beijing. So Beijing is the one of the richest cities in China. So you can't use this number for elsewhere in China, but like in the city of Beijing, they did a survey, and parents were saying that they were expecting to spend over 400,000 USD on their kids from 0 to age 18, and about half of that, or maybe a little over half, was like real estate, buying real estate in the right school districts. But then the other half was a lot of it was towards after school education. So you can imagine this is a great burden to parents, and it was having a effect on people's willingness to have kids. And there's a population demographic crisis in China right now where the birth rate is dropping precipitously. So it's not anywhere near a replacement rate. So the government is naturally quite worried about this. And of course, from the welfare perspective of the parents, they don't want to have the parents be stressed out. But again, the consequence is that they're not having kids, which is not good for the state. So that is really the main reason for the after school tutoring crackdown, that capital, the influx of capital, because everyone wanted to be, for their kids to have a leg up, but there's so much capital had flowed in that it was really distorting the situation. And middle class, your average middle class citizens were feeling like they were effectively like bankrupting themselves to send their kids to school.
Yeah, and especially in a scenario where you spend all this money to get into the right school district, and then the teacher isn't even really teaching at school because they're trying to sell the after school service. That's like particularly burdensome.
Yeah, they had to actually outlaw that behavior. I mean, it's weird, right? Like, again, if guidelines had to come out and say this is illegal, that it was happening sort of at scale.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, and this happened a few years ago, but, again, some teachers are still doing it. I wouldn't say that's the main behavior, in 2021, but that was certainly a factor that was going on in years past.
So why
just to
was
give you an example of how bad it was? Yeah.
So why was this year the year that sort of the headlines happened across, my computer screen and the EdTech crackdown and stuff like that? Like what happened recently that brought it to the forefront of people's attention?
Right. So it's always been discussed as, China wants education to be a public good. So K-9, which is compulsory education, is free. And in the high school isn't very expensive. So, and college isn't very expensive. It's nothing like what we have here in the US. So it's meant to be a public good. And, after school tutoring, again, was making it in effect like an actually very expensive thing to educate people's kids, right? So that's always been an issue. But I think it was really, again, brought to the forefront because of the census data. So China does a census every decade, just like we do here in the US. And the census data really showed that the population decline was probably worse than people were expecting. And the government really, I think it's not necessarily the government just all of a sudden realized it. It was more like, okay, based on this data, things that we have been preparing for a while, now we really feel like we have the political will, the consensus to really push it into
that makes sense.
being.
Now it's not just a feeling. Now we've actually got something to point to.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it was not a feeling anyway. It was already like data, but it was more like, this is the straw that broke the camel's back. Basically, like, there's sort of one additional data point that just made it like, okay, guys, we can't deny this. We really have to do something. You could argue that the action they ended up taking, which is make all the after-school tutoring programs into nonprofits, is somewhat drastic, or I would use the word draconian. And maybe that wasn't necessarily the right action to do, but it was pretty clear, again, hindsight is 2020, that some action was going to be taken.
Okay. That makes sense. And then the other big thing that's come across my screen recently is the gaming crackdown, right? Or how would you describe, I don't know if crackdown is the right word, but how would you describe what's going on in gaming? As my kids sit behind me and play Minecraft, which maybe they should be subject to some of the same rules.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it was really hilarious to me. I'm not a parent yet, and it was really hilarious to me how many Western parents were in favor of the game.
Yeah, I was kind of like, I want this.
Yeah, I mean, I personally thought it was really harsh, but everyone was like, hey, you wait until you have kids, then you'll really understand. So the gaming crackdown that you're talking about is specifically on minors. So under 18s now can only play 3 days a week, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and other holidays from 8 to 9 p.m. So that's 3 hours total a week. And the way they're going to enforce it is basically, it looks like, at least the way Tencent's enforcing it now, it's probably how everyone's going to enforce it, is they're going to use facial recognition. So your gaming account's tied to your real ID, which has your age on it. And they're going to basically, if they think that you might be a minor playing, they're going to force you to swipe your face, basically move your face around in front of a camera and verify that you are the person playing. In that way, catch minors who might be abusing or trying to skirt around the rules. But that is the gaming crackdown.
I liked your tweet the other day. What did you say? Or it was last night. What did you say that you read a story about? Was some grandma swiping her face in order to let her kids play or something?
Yeah. No. It was the top tech story in China, and it was all over my feed. It was hilarious. It's basically, there's someone had been playing at 3 a.m. A couple days in a row, and then one day they had gotten a pentakill, so 5 kills in a row, which is in Dota 2. And then this person, basically people were like, okay, this has to be a little kid playing or some teen playing. I guess the assumption is that teens are really good at this game, which from my observation I think is true.
Yeah, I would say grandmas probably aren't.
Yeah, exactly. So they were like, hey, Tencent, you guys, this is clearly a kid playing. You guys are not really observing the rules, right? And Tencent went and looked at it and said, hey, based on the information that you've given us, because someone had taken a screenshot of the account and stuff, this is actually a 60-year-old I don't know if she's a grandma, but a 60-year-old female playing. And this person has swiped their face to verify that they're the player 17 times in the last couple months.
Wow.
So we have done, basically, they were like, we've done everything we can to verify that this is not a minor. On the off chance that this is, someone's grandma swiping their face for their grandkid, please stop doing it.
Yeah.
that's not what you're supposed to do.
But so also,
that became the biggest
if
news.
It's not that you're swiping it for your grandkid, good for you for being so good at Dota 2. That's dope.
Yeah, she should. All my friends were like, hey, she should go and open up a gaming live stream and become an influencer.
Yeah, she could be on Twitch or something or whatever the equivalent is, and she could just be the really cool older woman that just gets pentakills all the time. That would be super fun to watch.
Exactly. I had never heard of the word pentakill until
I hadn't either, but I'm going to start using it.
Yeah, pentakill.
Yeah. If I don't watch out, it might be in my portfolio for my bad stocks. But anyway, I digress. Within that context, it seems to me that if you were to be charitable to the government, you would say they're looking out for children's interests. And maybe to the Western world, it's heavy-handed. or like you said, draconian. But I guess the thing that is hard for me, and you had actually said this, I believe in another tweet, that the people that are informed about China don't really have strong answers on what's going on, but it seems like a lot of the uninformed people like are convinced that they know. I mean, do you mind like expanding a little bit about that? Because it seems to me that the more that I learn about it, the more I'm like, okay, I know I don't know anything about this. What do you think about what I just asked? And then where should people maybe start to try to get more informed?
So 2 questions, right? So first about the government's gaming restrictions. I would say, yeah, overall, China is very protective. You know, some people use the word paternalistic about the youth. And this is something, I think quite cultural. Like I'm just reflecting on the fact that, I spent half my childhood in China, half in the US. And I don't think there was this sense in the US, or at least it wasn't part of the propaganda that, you're a minor and you're the youth of China and you're expected to like create the future. Maybe people say that in some marketing speak, but in China, this is very much taught to you like every day. You're the future of the country, and the rest of society, it's their job to make sure that you, as children, as youth, get the best resources, right? Everyone's happy to like basically sacrifice for you so that you can become the best you can be for the sake of society, for the sake of the country. I don't think that sense is really here.
Maybe I think here we say, let's leave it to the parents and see how it all turns out. Right? I mean, for real, right? That's kind of the philosophy here.
Yeah. So first of all, like there is the sense of age is, I think, very, very much more apparent, like in Asian societies in general, and especially like youth. People really, really try to devote a lot of resources to youth. And people feel like it's their people, I mean, just everyone else in society who's not young, feel like it's their responsibility to do something for the youth. And youth in general, not just their own children. So that one cultural element is there. And then you have the fact that in regulation-wise, China actually has a lot of restrictions for how minors use the internet. It's not just, gaming time play. It's like there's a lot of content that's considered inappropriate for youth. Things like you can't flaunt your wealth, right? Because they believe that as a child, you're very impressionable, and they want to, again, paternalistically control your environment so that you are not met with bad influences when you are, quote unquote, vulnerable.
Okay. What's going on with Chinese e-commerce and like how, like the creator economy, and I've read about how many video self-produced influencers, for lack of a better term, are creating almost their own QVC. Like what's going on in e-commerce in that way in China relative to the US?
Relatively. So the biggest thing that is in China that isn't here yet in the US in a big way is live streaming e-commerce, where I think most people are calling it live commerce now. It is basically interactive QVC, right?
Yeah.
So home shopping, where it's just sort of one way. Maybe you could dial in. I guess maybe QVC is somewhat interactive as well.
Yes, QVC is very interactive. Thank you very much.
Yeah. But now it's like primarily on your phone, right? You already see this on Amazon Live. You see it in a couple of startups such as Pop Shop Live, which, by the way, took their inspiration from China. But in China, it's a really big industry. I think it was something like $150 billion last year. And the top live streamers, whose names are Via and Austin, each had over $3 billion of a gross merchandise volume, GMV, last year.
Oh my goodness.
So again, that's not net revenue. So, and I would...
Yeah, it's not their take rate or whatever, but it's what's going through.
It's definitely not their take rate, yeah. It doesn't account for returns, and sometimes these are promotions, right? Like people maybe buy it and then don't even check out. They could still be counted as GMV, depending on how GMV is counted. GMV is a very sort of squishy metric, but that's still pretty impressive because they're not one-man shops. But there are one person in front of the camera.
Yeah.
But they usually do have a big team. Via actually has 500 people.
Yeah, you would have to. You can't do that kind of volume without a team behind you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So it's the hottest thing. It is, so TikTok's owner, ByteDance, has, a similar app in China called Douyin, and that is one of their big, it is poised to be one of their big revenue drivers very soon, but they're already driving a ton of e-commerce volume through the platform. And I would say that I actually just did a panel on live commerce for Agora, which is the sort of video company, real-time video audio company that powers some of these platforms. And I do expect live commerce to come here into the West. I think it's just slower than it happened in China for various reasons I could go into if you want.
Yeah, I'd love to hear them. I mean, I'm a QVC investor, so I can nerd out on this all day. But people are tired of hearing me talk about QVC.
QVC. Oh, interesting. Okay, very interesting. Yeah, so I would say the reasons are, so number one, in China, you have like sort of infrastructure reasons, right? Like really cheap physical logistics, right? That makes just e-commerce penetration higher in China than here. And then you have really easy mobile payments, mobile wallets that makes it really much simpler, like a much cleaner experience when you shop just in general. Then you have the fact that the biggest player in the space, the one with 60% market share in China in e-commerce, is Alibaba. And they really threw themselves into live commerce. And I think without them throwing themselves so hard at this opportunity, it wouldn't have grown the way we've seen it happen in China. Because in 2016, they basically decided, they said, hey, commerce is great and all, but we really want people not to just only come here and search for things when they think of it. We really want them to just come here and like just sort of browse. We want it to be content. So they believe that the future of commerce is content.
Yeah.
So how can we make content? Well, at the time, live streaming was already really hot in China as an entertainment, like you can go watch people doing stuff on TikTok live streams, right? So the entertainment live streaming was already really hot. They said, what if we made that into a e-commerce component? What happened was they not only fiddled with what I would call the sort of supply side, the talent side. They trained, the earlier, I mentioned the live streamers, Via and Austin, they actually were part of the efforts that Alibaba invested in to train these live streamers, because not everyone, even if you're good at entertainment live streaming, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be good at shopping live streaming.
Yeah, no, it's like a very specific skill set.
It's a specific skill set, and you need to also help them understand how to not only promote, but like pick merchandise, right? Negotiate with merchants, etc. So they invested heavily into that. They then also, of course, put it front and center in their app, right? So it was like literally in the middle of the front page of the app after they decided that they were going to go heavily into it. So on the user side, you couldn't avoid it. And then you were getting lots of promotions also to use it. You would get like, special discounts to use during live streams. And then they also made it a central part of the merchant experience. So Alibaba has Singles Day, which is the Chinese version of Black Friday, except much bigger. And it's like a huge shopping event in China where every merchant really is going to participate, right? If they want to be big in e-commerce at all. And they made it a central part of the Singles Day, even in the first year. So a lot of merchants were basically incentivized to experiment with it. So they really
When was this? Just time frame, sorry.
2016.
Okay.
2016,
right.
Only 5 years ago. Yeah, so you can think of it as Alibaba wasn't the first platform, by the way, but they were beaten by Mogujie, which was like a very small platform, just by a couple months. Alibaba was really the most important platform. So before then, you can think of GMV in China through live streaming e-commerce is really zero. And then 5 years later, it's like 150 billion.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but again, because they put in all this effort and truly made it a strategic priority.
Yeah. If you look at what Amazon has done, it feels, I don't know that this is a true statement, but at least from the consumer standpoint, that it's almost like an afterthought. Right? It's not at the center of the homepage, right? It's not like
it's
being
not
pushed.
At the center.
Yeah.
I noticed that they started pulling it, I think, up more and more. It is on the top tab. So it is on one of the sections. So it is technically on the front page when you're on the PC. I think it's harder to discover if you're on the mobile, but really you have to, you have to do, like, what I like to say is live streaming e-commerce people like to think like, oh, it's just a uniquely Chinese phenomenon. And I don't think there's anything uniquely Chinese about it. It's not like people in China just like love shopping on their phones through live streams, right? It's not like part of the culture. It's because of all these incentives that people like Alibaba, again, the dominant market player, invested in and put into the marketplace. And that's how they were able to accelerate it so quickly.
I don't think it's uniquely Chinese either. And I say that, one, because of my love for quality, value, and convenience, also known as QVC. but so like the psychological aspect of that business, the reason that I like it is, like there are a lot of customers. I don't know whether or not it's the majority or not, but like they have this subset of super customers. They describe the host as family. Right. And I think that like you probably experience from the podcast, people feel like they know you, right? When your voice is in their ear. Now you put some video on top of that and it becomes part of your daily routine. And it's like this host or salesperson, for lack of a better term, is like somebody I know. There's like an emotional connection with these people. And I think that that's human. And if you study QVC, it's throughout geography. So I don't think that it would be uniquely Chinese at all.
No, not at all. And it's just that, again, QVC has a little bit of a, or I mean, I don't like
people think it's for old ladies. I get it. I know.
But I don't know how it works these days. But, back in my day when I'm old, and back so when I was young, you had to like call in, right? But imagine how frictionless it is on your mobile, right? Especially if you have an integrated storefront, right? And payment experience. And in the case of all the live streaming e-commerce apps in China, it's also gamified, right? So the interactivity is not just from, me being able to ask questions, but the host can also interact with me. They can throw me raffles, right? They can in China, it's very common to give you hongbao, so red packets, which is basically cash, right? So it is basically like a raffle, right? Like every 5 minutes, maybe I give out some free gifts or some cash. So you are incentivized to stay there and participate and not leave, right? So I do think also that is one thing that is missing in some of the products I'm seeing. I think more and more people are incorporating it, but the time scarcity and the sort of real-time aspect of the live streams are much, much more present in the Chinese versions of the apps, partly because the streamers are trained to use it, partly because the tools themselves have those functions, right? But yeah, I think it can absolutely work here as well. I'm waiting for Amazon to, Amazon and other players to put it in. But right now, if you go to Amazon Live, you can only like sort of chat on the side.
Yeah. Do you think that, so part of the reason that a lot of people like to call in to QVC is, it's just kind of funny to even say out loud, but I do love it. The part of the reason they call in is they want like descriptions of the product, right? So you're looking at something on television historically, and it's like, well, what does this basket feel like? How much can this basket take? Do you think that like the logistics system in China gives it a competitive advantage? Maybe not relative to Amazon, but relative to history, because like I've heard, how long does it take to get your package from like Alibaba and JD? I've heard it's like same day almost, right? Or even
JD
quicker.
is definitely less. JD is known for their logistics, so it's less than 24 hours typically. It's usually like, next half day, right? If you order whatever before midnight, you get it before noon. And then they're now actually working on, 1 hour and 30-minute deliveries.
That's insane.
That's every logistics.
I know, but it's just so fast to think about,
Yeah. But like if you're not using JD, which is like a sort of a premium e-commerce experience, maybe it's a couple of days, but 2 days is very standard. Again, we have it in Amazon as well. So it's more that I think for China, it's not like the logistics per se. I think they actually did surveys on why people like to buy on live streaming e-commerce. And a lot of it is actually because of promotions. So you have to be, if you think about it, the whole point of live streaming e-commerce is that the transaction has to happen then. Because if it doesn't happen then, you might as well just be playing a video, right? So how can you get people to transact right then? You have to get them to impulsively buy. And then if you want to get them to buy, the easiest is to sell them something they already know and are interested in and maybe kind of understand or maybe already want to buy, so a branded product they're familiar with, and then give them a discount, give them a price they can't refuse.
Yep. QVC does the deal of the day. And then they were like,
yeah, exactly.
And then they were the OGs of BNPL. Yeah. Like they've always had Easy Pay way before BNPL was a thing. They always had it.
I know. We're just always repackaging the same concepts and selling.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how the world works that way. Yeah. But I do think it's really interesting. Yeah. Is there like a reason why China, and this actually might tie into the VIE questions that you may get a lot, but is there a reason why like some of these Chinese platforms became so dominant, like Tencent and Alibaba? I remember listening to some of your previous interviews and some things that you've said about your days in venture capital, that like there wasn't the industries there actually were, or still sort of are, starved for domestic capital. So they needed external capital to come in. Was it like a race for money that they won? Or is it just kind of like why is the competitive landscape the way it is with these major super apps in general?
Well, I think at least part of the reasons because there was like lax regulation and there were basically no antitrust rules, right? So if you were Alibaba, you could do things like, this is what they got fined a couple $2 billion for, which is make people do so-called two choose one, right? So tell a merchant that if you want to show up on our platform, then you're going to have to remove your stuff off of JD. Right? Yeah. As an illustrative example, please don't sue me, Alibaba.
Well, they just got fined. I don't think, yeah. Okay, that's fair.
So I guess,
we're talking theory.
Pretty safe. Probably pretty safe.
Everything's opinion here.
And I think that is part of it. The other part of it is the fact that, if you were, first to raise capital, outraised your competition, you could do pretty well. And in the beginning, capital is pretty scarce. So it was probably flowing towards, the first place winner, and it just like snowballs from there. But I do think the regulations had a lot to do with it.
That's interesting because I mean, again, as somebody that's very uneducated about this all, when I do read about it, it seems as though the majority of attention goes through a small number of platforms there. And I think that's probably just how the internet works anyway, right? The scale benefits accumulate to the winner. But I enjoy at least reading about it. I can't say that I'm knowledgeable about it at all.
Yeah, I would say it's a little exacerbated in China, probably. Again, I agree with you. In fact, an investor messaged me and was like, "Oh, I'm really not a fan of these antitrust rules because monopolies is like it's the only way internet companies can make money." I was like,
I hate this competition stuff. I want to invest in monopolies. Yes, we get it, sir or ma'am.
So I was like, okay, well, I don't know if I agree with that necessarily, but it is. Again, it's probably some of these markets, unless they're regulated, right, are winner take most, winner take all markets. But you have the fact that in China, players were doing certain things that would definitely not fly in the US. So give you an example. And this is still being resolved. This is literally being resolved as we speak. It hasn't yet happened, where Alibaba and WeChat, which is owned by Tencent, a bitter rival, like mutually ban each other's. So you cannot, for example, send a link to an Alibaba, well, specifically Taobao, to a Taobao store within your WeChat, because the other person just will not be able to see it. Yeah. So you sent this like,
it's kind of like Twitter, Instagram
encrypted
beef, but not quite.
Oh,
I mean, they're not quite as bad, but there was an integration, right? But it's kind of similar.
Right. Twitter does not let me send a lot of links, but it also does let me send a lot. So I don't know.
They don't. But you can link, but there was an integration. I think Instagram didn't let you have a full integration with Twitter links or whatever.
Okay.
It certainly would let you send the link. It wouldn't not let you send the link. That would be insane here.
Right. Yeah. So in this case, this is not what's happening. You actually would have to end it. So there's a special function, and it's not just Alibaba. It's also ByteDance. If I try to share, for example, a Douyin video, I have to create this, code that's special for WeChat and then paste into my WeChat. And then my friend will take this code, which is like scrambled Unicode, basically, and then go to the app, put it in, and then it will bring up the page I'm trying to send them.
Wow. And that's
Yeah.
still going on.
That's about to be resolved. The authorities have made it very clear they don't like this. So I'm
Okay,
guessing that'll be resolved shortly.
yeah, so that's a really good point. So the authorities have made it clear they don't like it. So I think it's probabilistically more likely than not that something is going to come out, right? When that thing comes out, I feel like my Twitter feed is going to explode with people saying, "See, I told you that you can't trust China. They're changing the rules."
Maybe. This piece of news has already gone through the news cycle, but it's possible because, that the substantive changes aren't yet reflected. So it's possible that when the changes are reflected, it's going to be a whole new news cycle. Yes, and I do expect those reactions.
Because I feel like, a lot of the people that I interact with are investors. And I do feel like, look, a lot of what was done uncovering a lot of the frauds in China was very good investigative work, and people deserve to be commended on it. But I also think it's used as a crutch to stop thinking in many instances. And I just think there's a lot of Western hot takes on what's going on in China that are completely unresearched. As somebody that follows the regulations that come out and how some things are sort of foreshadowed, how do you on average gauge the CCP's, boy, I might really put you in a tough spot here, but how they go about their business, and do you think it's rational what they do? Do you think it comes out of left field? Do you think it's and I know it's a broad question, but I think I'm going to stop it there. Sometimes I ramble with my question, as I am.
So first of all, I would discount the people who are like, oh yeah, I know exactly what the government's going to do because, whatever I read Xi Jinping thought or whatever the heck. It's not true because the guidelines or the speeches from Xi or stuff from the government until the policies are revealed or very close to when the policies are revealed are pretty general. And there are things that oh, hey, we need to improve the infrastructure of our country.
Yeah.
We need to invest more in, STEM talent. It's like the same thing the White House does. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, right? It's we understand our weaknesses. We need to make them less sucky, right? So that's just not very necessarily helpful. What you do get a good sense of is what the priorities are, right? Because, China, as in with any country, there are a ton of problems. There's problems everywhere you look. So based on what the government is saying, well, they will literally say, this is our highest priority, right? Then you know what the priorities are. So in that sense, I guess you could say you kind of might know where the regulations are falling. However, the specific execution, like how are the laws actually finally shake out to be, you wouldn't know unless you were working in that industry, right? So antitrust, for example, I certainly didn't know, but I then went and talked to lawyers who'd been working on advising the government or regulators on antitrust. And then I was like, oh, okay, you've been working on it for 4 years, right? So in that sense, you could get somewhat of a heads up, but some of these other situations like EdTech, again, you might know a general direction. You might know the government is really serious about education, but which government isn't serious about education, about improving education?
Yeah, and especially extractionary practices on middle-class families trying to make their kids better. That's not going to fly politically anywhere.
Anywhere, exactly. Somewhat predatory, et cetera. Of course, something's going to happen, but did you know it was going to be nonprofit? No, I don't. Anyone who says that, I think, I would be like, show me a chat transcript or a voice memo or something, predating the regulations that prove to me that you are that prescient, because I don't think that's really generally the case. I would say overall, for me, I can understand where the government is going. As for the exact policies, my personal opinion is that it's really hard to find a policy that everyone's going to be happy with.
Yeah.
Right? No matter how good your intentions are. Unfortunately for investors, you are not necessarily the stakeholder that is being prioritized. So whether or not, when people are saying this is a good or bad policy, what they're really saying as investors are that this doesn't benefit me as a shareholder.
Yeah.
Or maybe this actively hurts me, right? So I could understand that. But if I take a non-shareholder perspective, then I would say directionally, I can understand where a lot of the policies are going. I don't have enough knowledge. I'm not a policymaker in the weeds. Researching this, year in, year out, I don't know if that was the best decision to make. So I can sit here and, be an armchair analyst and do hot takes all day, but I am someone who, I guess, gives the regulators, policymakers a little bit benefit of the doubt that they're trying their best and that they've weighed all the costs and benefits and decided that this was the best way.
Yeah. And I think like that, what I enjoyed so much about being able to listen to the conversations in LA is like, I came away with that kind of a feeling about what was going on is, okay, if I were an investor in China, I definitely wouldn't want to invest on a company clearly on the other side of policy. But if I were in the West looking at, say, well, education has now become nonprofit, to draw like the click whir or the connection to, oh boy, everything has to watch out, I think is lazy thinking. I think it misses a lot of nuance. I think that you have to respect the power that the government has, but at the same time, I think this is where Charlie Munger, people are going to skewer me from this, but I think this is kind of where he's saying, like, I don't disagree with what they're doing in certain instances, and sometimes I wish I had the power to wave a wand and make the world as it should be. I'm empathetic to how he thinks about that. Whether or not I would express it the same way is different, and I just lost half my listeners in perpetuity.
Really?
People don't like that Charlie said that. I think he deserved a follow-up with Becky Quick, but yeah, people didn't like what he said about China at all. I think they perceived him to be defending communism, and I'm not sure that's what he was really trying to do. But yeah, well, again, that's another
Charlie's issue. Too old and senior to give a crap.
Yes.
About what the rest of us peons think.
That's correct. So you had mentioned, or a thought that your last comment triggered for me is, it appears to me that some of the fines and whatnot, when I read some of the articles, it appears to me that the government of China is saying you have to donate back to the people of China to make sure that, you know, everybody comes up together. As a business analyst, do you think that there is something that the government, like, are these companies able to be run for-profit motives, or are they going in the direction of sort of like a Soviet type for the benefit of society? And does that impede their competitiveness?
So I think, well, first of all, this is a question, by the way, it's not just foreign investors are asking, Chinese people are asking as well, right? When common prosperity came out, not that it was a new phrase, it's been a phrase that's been part of, you know, the Communist Party's literature since the 50s. It's just that it's taken sort of first priority now. People didn't necessarily understand what it meant. Like, people, you know, well, sort of, sure, we understand what common prosperity means, but how does it actually affect us? So there has been more clarification from the government on this. It's, however, not so clear that I'm not sure I can answer your question maybe to the exactitude that.
Well, there's no exact, no, I don't desire anything. I'm just kind of curious to hear you riff on it.
Yeah. So I think, like, so one thing we can be sure of is that they're not looking for equal outcomes, right? Because that is something that Chinese people were also, like, very alarmed about, right? Are you know, trying to make us into, like, sort of the old communism in the old days, right? That's not what they're looking for. It's really more about making the people who have not benefited equally from the economic development of the past 4 decades since the economy opened up, right? So in China, it's very obvious that the urban and coastal 400 million people or so live vastly better lives than the inland 1 billion or so people who are primarily, you know, in rural China.
Much like here.
Less developed China. Yeah, not actually necessarily that different. Yeah. By the way, China and U.S. share so many things in common.
Yeah.
So that's what they want to try to fix, right? Because if they don't do anything, then what's going to happen is that the advantages are going to continue to accrue to the coast, right? And to the already well-resourced. And then the gap may get bigger, or even if it doesn't get bigger, it's just sort of unacceptable right now, right? Because if you are someone who, you know, didn't live in the tier 1, tier 2 cities, and you were in rural China the last 40 years, yes, it did benefit your life, but it didn't really nearly benefit your life to the degree that you see a Beijinger or a Shanghainese would have benefited, right? So that is the intent about common prosperity. It's not that now, everyone's going to, whatever, have the same wealth, assets. It's more like we need to help the people that didn't get most of the economic benefit. And I would say that the shareholder implication, so you could be pessimistic and say that the companies now might have to do more of these things. It's called the third distribution, but really it's just philanthropy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not required. The government has made it clear that it's not required, but it's highly recommended.
That's required in my book, for the record.
Okay. So a lot of companies are going to do it, right? What I would say is, like, as a shareholder, actually consider the economic state of China and the projects that these companies have proposed. There are actually not the donations. A lot of the projects are just investments in rural China that the government is now, I would think of it as maybe accelerating a little bit by encouraging the companies to do it, but it's actually a really great opportunity anyway, right? It's basically saying that try to put more investment in the poorer places in China versus, just, I don't know, selling more lattes to people on the Shanghai Bund or something. So it's not like there's no return there. It's just that the government is trying to direct you to a different area of investment. I don't personally think it's going to be very detrimental to the company's finances. I think a lot of people are thinking of it as like a straight up donation that they have like no control over. But again, it's really just sort of socially responsible projects that maybe wasn't the first thing on Alibaba or Tencent's to-do list that they're now going to invest in, but should yield more customers, more middle-class buyers for them in the future.
Yeah. This is what, I don't know if you saw, I mean, I floated some questions on Twitter, but somebody had said, like, it's going to hurt the incremental margins or whatever. And I was saying, like, yeah, but you could argue, I think pretty credibly, that it helps the terminal value if it's done in a way that balances government interest with capitalism, because you can lift the standard of living among everyone. And I think that there's a reasonable argument to be made that not leaving a portion of your society behind actually increases the probability of longevity and increases aggregate wealth, which would increase purchasing power. Now, this is going to be offensive to my Western brethren, but this is why I don't think Charlie Munger is just some insane old guy. I mean, I actually think, like, you can argue that side of the equation. I'm not, time will tell which side is correct, but I'm not sure that it's objectively one way or the other.
Yeah, I'm with you. And also, like, I think we need to realize that these are just plans, right? If the plans don't work out, the government can adjust them. And the government has been known to be, like, very adaptable when certain policies don't work out. In fact, even the edtech stuff, so pretty draconian, pretty extreme, pretty absolute, but maybe it doesn't work out in the next 3-5 years and you might see some pullback. It's certainly happened in other sectors before. So I think people assuming that this is the way it's been set and this is a path that can never curve, that's not really realistic either. And also, one thing I wanted to point out is, like, what I find really interesting is, like, when people, I don't understand how people reconcile saying that we need to simultaneously believe everything the government says or decrees, and then believe nothing the government decrees. I feel like it's like confirmation bias, right? It's really being selective, right? It's like, okay, if you believe that if the government says, oh, we highly suggest you to do more philanthropy, and you believe that is like ironclad and you must follow it, then why don't you believe them when they say something else, like, we support private enterprise and we're liberalizing our markets, and by the way, look at it, we are allowing Wall Street banks and financial institutions to have fully owned subsidiaries here, right? So why do you believe one and not the other, right?
Because
so
cognitive dissonance is very hard for people to keep.
It is very painful.
Yeah, it requires actual, like, real, true thought that makes people tired, and people don't like that. I mean, I actually think that's the reason.
It's true. It is true. It's neurobiologically, we don't like cognitive dissonance because it just takes too much energy. So it's like it's an avoidance mechanism.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is there's something very real, at least in the Western. I mean, I don't think this is going out on a ledge to say this, but you are also overlaying political bias and home country bias and us versus them. And then you combine it with cognitive dissonance. And like, I just don't think people can do it. I really fundamentally don't think the human iOS, to borrow Jim O'Shaughnessy's term, is like prepared to just be rational about stuff on average when these issues come up.
Yeah. And I think people just, I mean, for me personally, again, I live in the Bay Area. My life, my family is all here. Sure, my work, is largely revolving around China tech companies. But at the end of the day, I don't really think that hard about I care about the direct impacts to my life. So it's really, I care about the fact that I had to install solar panels today because my power keeps on going out, and I worry about wildfire, insurance and, the drought in California and all this stuff. I don't know why people can get so worked up over something that's happening on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
Especially if it's like something very abstract, like, I don't know, some political decree, like,
and something that honestly doesn't have, I think if you think probabilistically, it's very, very hard to be certain that you're correct about whatever your assessment is. I find it interesting that a group of investors who theoretically should understand probabilistic thinking are so certain about certain issues that they have absolutely no clue what's going on inside the rooms that they're going on. Like, I know enough to know I don't know.
Right. I know. Exactly. And then that was a tweet you referenced. Basically, I was saying that I know a lot of people who are much better connected than I am, much more knowledgeable, much more experienced, and they know exactly what they don't know, and a lot of things they don't know because it's not visible to the public. We're not Xi Jinping. We're not like the head of the PBOC. So we can only sort of guess and have exactly like you said, a probabilistic assurance of what comes next. Confidence levels, right?
Yeah.
So.
And the other thing that I like that you had said is, I don't know why, I'm going to misquote you here, but the takeaway that I had is like, why are people so hyperbolic, and why do they want to like create conflict between two major superpowers when there doesn't need to be any? like as someone that's living in today's world, I'd just rather not go down that rabbit hole.
Right, exactly. And it has nothing to do with like, China, US. I don't want to see it between any powers at all, right? Like, period. I'm a pacifist. But I suspect it is because of Twitter and how it rewards negative loops of engagement, right? So Eugene has a really good shtick about this, which is that Twitter basically has no breaks, right? So like if I want to engage with someone and they're positive, I retweet and I respond. But if I disagree with them, if I vehemently hate what they're saying, I also retweet and respond. So, and then it just amplifies the signal. So then it's just like whatever, right? Like whatever's most controversial, whatever gets the most positive and negative feedback becomes the most amplified noise, unfortunately.
Yeah. I like to think that karma ends up killing the negative people a little bit earlier than the positive ones, but we'll see. I'd like to see that physiologically. I think that the negative stuff really takes a toll on your body, but I'm not a scientist and I'm not a doctor, but I've always found positive people to be more fun to be around. Just my 2 cents.
I think you're right. So
we'll see. Yeah. We'll see who makes it longer, and we got a long time to play that out. Do you mind riffing on a little bit? Everybody, at least in the investor class, is worried about the VIE structure. And I have heard you talk about how the lack of regulation does not mean that they're illegal. And actually, like, the discussion of VIEs in a way makes the structure a little bit more valid, potentially. Do you mind just kind of discussing that? For people that don't know, the VIE was created. It's a variable interest entity. It's basically a derivative ownership, because China was not open to outside capital. And this is kind of a loophole that they created in the late 90s?
Yeah, I think with the IPO of Sina. Yeah.
And then it's never been like fully addressed within China regulations, correct? And now they're starting to talk about maybe addressing it. Is that a fair characterization of where we are and where we've been?
Kind of, yeah. So China restricts investments in certain industries, not all industries, and the VIE. So internet companies are unfortunately one of them because it's sort of considered under
That's right.
media,
Yeah, media, yeah.
broadcast, etc. So you cannot directly invest in internet companies operating in China. You have to invest in a shell company that then has these agreements, contracts, right? So you cannot own direct equity ownership, like you said. You are owning like a economic interest. And then what happened is that no one was overseeing VIEs at all for many, many, many years, right? Because the VIEs themselves are usually in the Cayman Islands, so offshore, not inside of China. And there's no legal, it doesn't fit into the legal system in China, right? So a lot of people, by the way, don't think China has any laws, but it does.
Yeah.
And so like the courts or the regulators, they're like, hey, this is not even a Chinese entity. Like we can't regulate this. We can't do anything with this. So you have things like antitrust had to say specifically when the antitrust laws last year came out against internet platforms, they had to specifically say that this also applies to VIEs because that was not clear in the past that it would oversee VIEs. With the DD IPO and it triggered this, I wouldn't say it triggered, but there's this data security law that was coming online about, had already been passed and just went into effect actually on September 1st. DD went ahead with its IPO, even though I guess they were asked by certain regulators not to. Then the idea from the Chinese government is basically that, like, in the past, we didn't have an official way to enforce you not going to list abroad because there was no official review process because you are a VIE. So no one technically had, real jurisdiction over you. But now we're going to have a process where we're going to review your data security, no matter where, like, as long as you operate in China and have any Chinese user data, then we're going to enforce this.
Okay, and by data security, just real quick, you're talking about like privacy security, yes?
I'm not talking about privacy security, actually. It's different from privacy. It's more that you need to be responsible for the data you collect on customers, and you in this case, the fear, they haven't really, talked super transparently about it, but everyone believes that the fear is that, the listing abroad means that, the exchange operators, or at least let's call it foreign, regulators can ask for data from you, but the data is actually of Chinese citizens, right? So the Chinese government is like, we want to have oversight over this process. So we want to decide who gets to list overseas and who doesn't. So I interpret that as them wanting to exert more control over the VIE, which is what this whole thing is about, right? Because no one was overseeing it at all. And now people are, various agencies are now tasked because of data security, national security reasons, to then oversee VIEs, because all these really powerful platforms with a lot of data are all VIE structures. This does not necessarily mean that the VIE structure will not get regulated. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that now people are taking a look at it very seriously, right? And are like, this is no longer going to be a loophole where there's just a regulatory gap. So we are going to do something about this. What they're going to do about it, we don't know yet.
Yeah.
All we know is that right now they have a data security review. There could be, and there are rumors of other, restrictions. But I think personally, it's very unlikely that the VIE gets killed, right? And I don't mean necessarily the VIE. So maybe the VIE, that specific structure maybe doesn't survive. That's possible. But what I mean is the intent of the VIE, which is to let foreign capital flow into otherwise restricted businesses. I don't think that, at least doesn't make sense to me, that will be killed. That doesn't seem to be consistent with the signals the government has given. It's not consistent with the reality on the ground, which is that USD, because of the long-term shareholders, LPs, that, primarily invest in USD, is still a much better investor base for investing in technology. So there's just not enough RMB, long-term RMB holders inside of the country to support the industry. So China basically has to decide, right? Like there are competing objectives, right? We want to keep our data secure, but we still want foreign investment because our domestic investment is not able to meet the demand because we still want a thriving science and technology industry, right? So I personally think the last objective is going to trump out the other ones because I think it's pretty easy to have a review for data security and get comfortable around that versus completely killing foreign capital access.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you mind talking a little bit about why there is not the patient capital? It seems to me as though US-based tech investors are a better group at the moment, and maybe that's changing a lot, but at least historically, culturally, more suited to wait. They're more patient, basically, is what it all boils down to. And that Chinese investors tended to be more day trade or month trade focused, and that even some of the best VC funds in China were not able to raise sufficient capital because it was hard to find LPs that would lock up capital for a sufficient amount of time. Is that a fair way to categorize kind of the investor bases historically? And do you see that shifting at all?
It's certainly shifting. There is more long-termism in RMB LPs, but it is probably not coming fast enough, as fast as definitely my VC GP friends would like, right? So I think the main reason really is just because the market's too young. If you think about asset management and sort of wealth preservation and accumulation, it's just a much, much, much longer history in the US and in the West, right? I mean, I don't know, you can think of like people who have had hundreds of years, like in the US of like the Rockefellers, right? Or like the Rothschilds in Europe, right? You don't have any families like that in China. Everything was completely remade when the communists took over, and then no one really made any money until the economy opened up in 1979. So therefore it's just like a very, very new thing. In fact, in China, I think it's probably in the second generation now, but I remember a decade ago, the conversation was about, how do we, like, all the founders are still there at their companies. There's been no generational transfer of power, right? Or wealth, right? So yeah, China's, and much of Asia too, by the way. Singapore is a little bit more ahead, et cetera, but China is definitely, pretty young in this process. That's why you don't have the Harvard, Yale endowments who are happy to, put money away in really long locked up funds. You don't have that as much in China. To give you an example, the example I like to use is one of the top VC funds in China, 5Y Capital, raised, is it 5Y or Achieving? It's one of them. Sorry, I'm getting the name mixed up, but they just raised at the beginning of this year around $2 billion. And then I think it was $1.7 billion of that was in USD, and the rest was in equivalent in RMB.
Wow.
Equivalent. And this is like a top fund.
Wow.
That I'm sure people would be, dying to throw money at, right? And then they want RMB. All the GPs I talk to want RMB because RMB is, you don't have to deal with the VIE stuff, and then you can invest in, more flexible industries directly. It's not that the VIE is bad. I shouldn't say that.
No, but it reduces your flexibility.
RMB is pretty flexible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can go, you can very easily go public in China, although that's actually pretty hard. But whatever, that's the story you would sell. So, but they're happy to take RMB, right? I mean, if I'm an AUM investor, as most VCs are, happy to take all currency.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, all currency, but yeah, it's just hard. It's hard to find investors that are able to commit that amount of time. And even for one of my friends, he just raised a USD fund and RMB fund, and he said he could only get 8 years on his RMB fund.
Wow,
which is still pretty good. Because again, 5 years ago was more like a 5-year fund that you're looking at, which is really impossible if you're doing early stage VC. You can only do growth, right?
Yeah. Do the fund structures have the option to extend over there or not really? Because like here you have a 10-year and then, a couple years.
Yeah. They do generally. Yeah. But again, you're missing like 2 years up front, right? So,
yeah, which is a big deal when you're talking about 5 to 7 years, right? Or 7 to 10 years or whatever. Like every year matters in that.
Every year matters, exactly. And again, it's just also the pool of capital isn't that large.
Yeah.
So
that's where you had said that, and that it really clicked for me that I was like, this doesn't make sense for A lot of the concerns that I hear, I'm like, I just don't think people are thinking about this strategically. If you were China and you were thinking long, it doesn't make a ton of sense to, like, for lack of a better term, screw foreign investment now. Like, why now? Why in the time of a global technology race of getting installed bases would this be the time that you would say, yeah, we're going to crack down right now? Right now is when we don't want foreign capital. It makes no sense to me strategically. And I don't perceive China's government to be silly in certain ways. That would be a shocking divergence of my perception.
Yeah.
Do you mind talking?
And not to mention they're investing in VIEs where you don't even own the domestic company. Like, why? Like, I have control over, the company. Why don't I let foreign capital invest in the shell company?
Yeah.
It's like, it's a great gig.
Yeah. Why is it so hard to go public there relative to here? I heard space that you were on. Somebody said you just check the box here and it's a lot different there, but wouldn't mind if you expand on that a little.
Yeah, the U.S. is, a disclosure-based exchange. And partly, I would say, I really attribute a lot of things to just time, right? Again, Wall Street has had hundreds of years, 200 years or whatever it is to develop. And in China, the capital markets are really new. They're primarily founded in the 80s and 90s. And then, of course, we had a new exchange being announced just last week. But the rules in China are very, very onerous compared to the US. Like, I was just looking up the rules for the Beijing exchange. You actually have to be listed on another exchange for 12 months or fulfill certain market cap, revenue, R&D investment, operational cash flow requirements before you can list. So, and it's not just that, it's an application-based process. So the regulators can sort of stop approving at any given time. And they could do it for many reasons. They could do it because the market is, too hot or too cold, or they, don't want to approve, certain industries and they want to approve other industries first for whatever obscure, not transparent reason. So going public in China is actually pretty hard on the main boards. There are, lesser sort of OTC exchanges that is much easier to list, but what I'm talking about, the main exchanges here are significantly harder. And then even Hong Kong is sort of in the middle. Hong Kong has, my understanding, is a lot more onerous requirements than the US. In fact, so a great example is Didi, right? This is what's been reported. What happened is that in the US, when Didi is listing, Didi didn't have a lot of the full licenses. So license for the car, license for, the city, and license for the driver in many of the places they're operating. And I think the number that's been reported is actually quite high. Let's call it more than half. More than half of their revenues, one of these three licenses was like missing, right? Or incomplete or lapsed or whatever it was. So in Hong Kong, the exchange said, okay, we're doing DD on your revenues, and if any of these licenses are not compliant, then I refuse to let you count that revenue. Okay, so you cannot count that revenue. So DD's revenue was apparently going to be like greatly reduced if they listed in Hong Kong according to the rules of the exchange there. However, in the US, you could say, hey, by the way, here are revenues, and oh yeah, like, just so you know, we're not always compliant, right? You just have to disclose the risk, and then the shareholder, the buyer, decides whether or not that's a risk they want to take. Now, the risk is not actually that high because for a lot of these places, there's a what I'm saying is not the SEC is being totally irresponsible, is that the punishment for noncompliance is like a fine, and the fine's like actually pretty minimal. So Didi could just like sit there and get fined, like pay the fines all day, or and sometimes they have to wait for approvals to come through because it's not always possible to get the licenses in time or whatever it is. They do have good reasons, right, for saying like these are real revenues and you should count them, even if there's an asterisk. But the fact of the matter is, in Hong Kong, you just would not even be able to consolidate it into your financial statements, which would make it look like a very different company.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
The other thing that I've heard you talk about that I've been like super fascinated on is this fast fashion trend that's going on in China and how quickly they're getting products to market.
So I think you're talking about the unicorn Shein, which is rumored to be valued at 46 billion, although I guess they denied it. It's about 7 days for them right now.
Wow.
That's what's been said. But that's not actually
So this is from
surprising
concept to final product, right? Like this is like
Yeah.
very, very fast iterations. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not actually that surprising. So number one, when we went to China in 2019 with investors, we visited 2 companies in this space. They're not fast fashion, but they're like fashion e-commerce companies. One was Ruhan, which already went private, didn't do well post their IPO.
Went private, went public, you mean? Sorry.
Went public and then went private.
Oh, really?
Went public and then went private. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So already. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the other company is Mogujie, which is still public. One of the earlier, they were actually the first company to try live commerce. And, at Mogujie, they showed us that, or they told us that, it was only 7 days for people to make their clothes.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Ruhan was doing also, we actually walked by one of their sample rooms where people were, I guess, doing like the first part of the sample. I think some of it was done manually. I don't recall exactly, but they were also able to get their order volumes to 100 pieces, which is, by the way, Shein's sort of magic, right? That it's not just the time to turn around from design to production, but that they're able to get the minimum order quantities to so low. Because generally, when you work with factories,
you got a ton of upfront costs, right? And then you want to,
you have a ton of and they don't want to do minimum order volumes that are very low because they have to put in the whatever adjusts their lines.
Yeah, you got to tool it, and you got to get it ready for the run and all that stuff.
Exactly. And for electronics, you additionally have the problem that you may have different components and the minimum order volumes for different quantities for the components may vary. So maybe you have 10 items and 9 of them you can get a minimum order of 1,000, but then the 10th one you have to order like 10,000 for whatever reason, and then you have like all this inventory, right? So in general, factories, I would say the magic of Shein is, of course, the 7 days is impressive, but it's really also the really low pieces that they can order and then quickly replenish.
Yeah.
That counts for their success.
It's amazing. It's amazing to think of the progress that's gone on in manufacturing. And I hear, and again, like I'm really very uneducated about this, but it seems to me that China is really out iterating the US, whether or not it's speed or I don't know that that's a fair comment, but it's just the feeling that I have. Do you think that's a fair feeling?
In manufacturing?
Yeah,
well,
and some tech too. Like I don't know. I sometimes wonder if we have legacy systems in the US that put us at a little bit of a disadvantage.
I'm going to steal an idea from my friend Jeff Ding and ask you to think of innovation in sort of 2 pieces. One is sort of the fundamental breakthrough research, and the other is the scaling up of that research. And I do think China is actually very good at the latter. And because even when you scale up, there is some iteration that you're doing, right, for commercialization, and just the scaling up itself requires you to do that. But China is actually still pretty lagging on the fundamental research part. So it doesn't have a lot of the really high level talent, the whatever STEM PhDs. It doesn't have the ecosystem. It's just not as dense in terms of talent for a lot of these industries. Of course, that may be changing, by the way, if we continue to have really unfavorable policies towards Chinese Americans, then they all go back to China. But as of right now, China is still lagging. So I understand what you're saying about the quick to iteration thing, but I think it's primarily on the sort of scaling and application layer and not yet on the fundamental research as much. So you see that in how quickly the apps, of course, iterate and change and distribute and grow, but you also see it in the physical realm with consumer goods. But I would argue the consumer goods is really because China has been the world's factory for the last 40 years.
Yeah.
In China, it's not just, we're not talking about individual factories, it's like whole clusters of factories, right? Just like whole regions, like, the Pearl River Delta, the Yangtze River Delta, where there are just like entire industries. Remember earlier I was saying you might need, different components for whatever item you're making. Well, what if everyone who makes every single component that you need, is within like a 20-mile drive of each other, right? That really speeds up. Yeah, that really speeds up how quickly you can produce things and how quickly you can change them. And that's what's happening in China, actually. So for textiles and apparel, that is primarily in the Pearl River Delta, Guangzhou Canton. And that's where Shein has their offices. And that's where it's not going to be just Shein, by the way. It's going to be a ton of other Chinese brands. Actually, my friend has one called Cider, and they just raised from DST and Andreessen $130 million Series B, and unicorn in 12 months.
Wow.
Doing fast fashion.
That's amazing.
Well, they would argue it's more high quality fast fashion than Shein.
Yeah.
But still some kind of fast fashion.
I guess fast fashion in my pea brain is how quickly you can iterate, but that's not really the correct terminology, right?
I think it's referring to the price.
Yeah,
point,
I think so too. But that's not how I meant it.
Yeah, okay.
You know what I think is really interesting, how you're talking about geographic. Mm-hmm. I wonder a couple things. One, I wonder whether or not having such a focus on education and not allowing children to play as much potentially stunts some creativity that should be unlocked in a child's brain. I don't know how that would foster itself through an entire ecosystem, and it's just a thought. The other thought that I have is like that, what you touched on about geographic competence. I watched something on the glass blowers of Italy and specifically Venice, right? And how like when you have these geographic clusters of expertise, that's how you get like these really, really robust communities of innovation around it. And I one thing that America definitively benefits from is Silicon Valley and West Coast thinking and being clustered in that way. That's a very robust advantage.
Yeah.
I don't want to poo-poo us too much, but it's kind of interesting how those things happen in the world.
Yeah. So number one, I agree with you absolutely on just geographic clustering is important for everything. It's not just in China, but like Zara, for example, the sort of godfather of fast fashion, their entire supply chain is in Spain, is my understanding. And that's how they were able, they had to build it from scratch, right? I think Shein actually is able to ride on the fact that, all the other international brands had already basically invested into creating this cluster in China, so they could just sort of take advantage of it. But Zara really had to, kudos to them. They had to all build it from scratch. And the second point you said about the creativity, that is something absolutely is a concern in China. I'm not sure that it is going to show up on policy level necessarily, but if you just talk to, your average parent, they do recognize that this is a problem. Like no one actually wants the testing system. Like everyone thinks it's dumb and useless and is a waste of time, but no one has come up with a better solution to ensure fairness. Right?
Yeah.
And that's why people still subscribe to the testing system, but it's not because people love it. People think there are many deficient aspects of it and would love to see more creativity. I don't disagree at all that I think the US system in general we produce a lot more quirky people.
Yes, we do.
To put it politely.
Yes, we do.
To put it politely. Yeah. But of course, again, you do have China that was like 1.5 billion people. So you also just have a much, much larger denominator. So there are also plenty of quirky people there as well.
Yeah.
Plenty of creative people there as well. But I do think if it were me and, a lot of my friends who had kids, their children's education's probably the number one reason that they left. So like even the pollution, taking years off of your life, some people were like, maybe I could deal with it. But when it came to ensuring my kids have like a really great education and childhood and not like a super regimented existence, they tended to choose leaving China.
Interesting. Well, I'll tell you what, I have like truly enjoyed this conversation. I hope it's been enjoyable on your end. I've had a great time, and thank you very much for, spreading some of your perspective to people that ask me questions and get like really bad answers from me because I don't have anything intelligent to say about these things.
Not at all. You actually sound quite well informed, much better informed than many other people.
Well, I think it's really interesting.
Thank you
and I think I just think that in the world, this is going to sound so hippy-dippy, but empathy goes a long way, and trying to analyze situations and perspectives through the eyes of someone that is trying to accomplish a goal is so much more effective than assuming the answer is whatever your brain thinks and then like imputing wrongness elsewhere. I don't know where I got it. I think law school had something to do with it, but that's I've
Oh, you went to law school.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was good, even though the only tangible thing that I could tell you that I took out of law school was my wife. I didn't actually physically take her out. I just where we met, right?
That's very important. That's very important. As Charlie Munger would say, one of the most important decisions you can make as a human being is your choice of spouse.
Indeed. Yeah. I didn't mean to cut you off when I thanked you.
No, I wanted to thank you for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation as well. Hopefully we didn't turn away too many people from your podcast, but I'm pretty sure I think
I'm the only one that turns people off. I don't think you did anything bad.
Not at all. I think you have a very authentic style, and I really appreciate the direct and yet very gentle, way that you cradled my answers. And also the very direct way you asked them. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for joining. I hope you'll return again sometime in the future when we have something new to talk about. And regardless, I look forward to a life of talking to each other. I've enjoyed the times that we've spent together. So let's continue.
Yeah, thank you so much. I treasure them as well.
All right, cool.
Thanks so much, Bill.
But it's absolutely necessary